Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to sort of sum up what I've heard this morning, number one, it appears that we're engaged in a new form of aggression, if not war, that the Soviet Union and now Russia has been utilizing for many years, but is now taking it to a much higher level. It strikes me that Vladimir Putin is playing a weak hand very well. A couple of questions to try to, very, very short. I would say that what we've seen and what you've told us this morning is that what we saw in the 2016 election is absolutely consistent with prior Russian practice and current Russian practice in other parts of Europe and the world. Is that correct, Mr. Watts?
Yes, it's still going on today.
Secondly, is it your opinion that this is going to continue? In other words, 2016 is not a one-off.
No, I mean, they're going to continue until something meets their challenge. And right now, there's nothing meeting their challenge. Any European effort I've seen is very small in comparison.
And Mr. Rumer, would you say that, Dr. Rumer, that Putin is a Democrat, a Republican, or an opportunist?
I think it's he's an opportunist, and even if we counter this, or when we counter his efforts, he will continue anyway. It's going to be a dynamic, not a sort of static situation where we deploy countermeasures and that stops. But it will keep going on.
I think it's very important, though, that we realize that he is neither a Democrat nor a Republican, because it means that everybody on this dais and everybody in political life in America, regardless of their party, is at risk. In 2016, it happened to tilt because of his interest toward the presidential candidate of the Republican Party, but it could very well be the opposite in 2020 or 2022. Mr. Watts, you're nodding, but I can't record that.
Yes, they will shift to whichever one supports or is most amenable to their foreign policy position, or who they think is weak for manipulation. That they will go with whichever one it is.
And one thing that was mentioned today somewhat briefly, but it came up in some of the questions, is not only did they hack the Democratic National Committee and misinformation and disinformation and all of that, but they also pushed and probed into our state election systems in a number of states. Apparently, the information that we have thus far is it didn't work, but they tried. And Mr. Watts, would you agree that they weren't trying for fun? This wasn't entertainment. They were looking for a place to make changes in election results.
What no one's talking about is the information nukes that Russia sits on right now, because they hacked 3,000 to 4,000 people. I think this afternoon you're going to hear on the cyber, more technical side, this hacking was pervasive. We've focused on the DNC. I've been targeted. Some other people have been targeted that I know. They have our information. So anytime anyone rises up that they choose against, whether it's Republican or Democrat, Congress or executive branch or a state official, they've got the ability to do the same thing they just did over the past year.
And I want to touch on that in a minute, but I do want, do you believe that they will try again to compromise state-level election voting machines, registration rolls?
They could.
That's what they tried this time.
I don't think it's about breaking into the election machines. The goal is to create the perception that the vote may not be authentic. And so that's why it's smart to target voter rolls, because just the act of hitting a voter roll doesn't change the votes, but then you can run an influence story that says there's voter fraud in the United States, that the election's rigged, that the count wasn't accurate, and you can gain traction with it. It's a pinprick perception that they're trying to create.
You've mentioned several times, and I think the Russian term is kompromat, and I think it's interesting that they have a Russian term, which is compromising information. And this is active in the sense that not only can they take things off your computer, they can put things on your computer.
Yes.
That will compromise you, and I think that should send a shudder through all Americans, that this isn't only taking, if you can be very careful in your emails, but something can show up on your computer that's fake, and you could be in a lot of trouble. This is one of their techniques, is it not?
Yes, Americans should look to Europe, where this has happened quite a bit more frequently.
And finally, you talked a bit about defenses, and I think this is something that our committee in its report is going to have to look at. Cyber strategy is one. We have no cyber strategy in this country. There's no knowledge around the world of how we will react to a cyber attack, and I think that's part of what we have to do. Digital literacy, and that is people understanding the limitations of what they have on the internet. My wife has a sign in our kitchen that says, the problem with quotes on the internet is you can't determine whether they're authentic. Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
And, you know, we have to educate our people that they can't believe everything that they read on the internet. And part of that is, I think, your very creative suggestion of a kind of Snopes, expanded Snopes to check the validity, so people at least know, okay, there's some likelihood that is untrue. And finally, public awareness, which is what this hearing is all about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it.